In my last talk, I talked about how there can be sometimes an instantaneous, momentary, almost just a split second of seeing that the self that I have always believed myself to be, the solid individual that's always appeared to be here, is actually completely empty, is actually completely devoid of any kind of substance. This is often how an initial awakening occurs. It can usher in a period of, let's call it despair. And when I'm contacted by people who want to have one-to-one sessions to share what's going on in terms of non-duality, this is often the reason for it, because they have gone into a period of what's sometimes called the dark night of the soul, or sometimes called the desert. This is a common experience. The reason very often why despair may arise after an initial awakening is because it's like the individual has seen the possibility of an end to all their seeking, their dissatisfaction with being a self. But because that seeing is momentary, it's as if it has been offered to us and then, as it were, snatched away. And so, as I've said, what it can leave is this period of, okay, well, I saw something and I've lost it, but now the one thing that I know is that nothing that I can do can get me back to that, because it's been seen that I am an illusion. What can bring an end to that period of despair is another opening, if you like, a second seeing. And perhaps the best way to describe this second seeing is that in this, it's not simply the emptiness of everything, the emptiness of the person and the emptiness of the apparent external world in which the person seems to move is seen. Because when non-duality is fully seen, when the non-separation between what seems to be the self and seems to be the external world, really falls away, then what is seen is that although this, I'm pointing to the apparent self, seems to be, and indeed is, empty, and that, pointing out now to what seems to be the external world, also seems to be, and in actuality is completely empty, it's also full. And at this point, I always feel like stopping and apologizing for the seeming sounding paradox, because that certainly sounds like a paradox. And for the mind of the seeker, for the mind of the one who seems to be a person, it's an obvious thought to arise. Well, how can it be empty and full? That makes no sense at all. And to the mind, it doesn't make any sense, and it can't make any sense. But when it's directly apprehended, when it's directly seen, then it simply becomes, let's say, obvious. There can be no doubt left that what we're talking about here is that everything is both empty and full, that everything is, if you like, nothing arising as emptiness and fullness. And the fullness, it's very, very difficult. Well, it's not difficult. It's impossible to choose a phrase that adequately describes the fullness that is seen. But what is often, the phrase is often used, what I have written and talked about, and what others write about and talk about, is these two words, unconditional love. The mind might well be entitled to say, well, if this really is full, if everything and nothing is also fullness, then what does that fullness consist of? There's no adequate answer to that, but the phrase unconditional love seems to get it better than any other phrase for me, and it seems to get it better than any other phrase for some other writers and speakers who've tried to communicate about this. So when the self drops away and this is seen in its fullness, the nature of everything and of nothing is seen to be unconditional love. And the difficult word in that little phrase is not the word love. Love can be apprehended by everyone and related to by everyone in some way or other. But the difficulty is that the love that's seen when the self drops away is unconditional, because it's that word that makes what I'm saying such a challenge for the mind. Because the mind always lives in conditionality. The mind cannot help living in conditionality. It is its nature. In other words, the mind divides the world up in all sorts of ways. The mind divides the world up into me and the external world, into this and that, in all sorts of ways. But one of the primary ways that the mind divides the world up is it divides the world up into that which I love, that which I hate, that which I like, that which I dislike, that which I approve of, that which I disapprove of. The mind has many, many feelings and many, many opinions. And if you like, the duality between positive and negative, love and hate, peace and anger, is one of those core dualities. So the mind really cannot ever grasp unconditional love. But the assertion from here is that nevertheless, unconditional love can be seen when the mind is overthrown by the seeing of non-duality. And then it's realized that the conditions that the mind puts on what it likes, what it dislikes, what it's prepared to love, what it isn't prepared to love, what makes the mind angry, what doesn't make the mind angry, that all of these distinctions really have no ultimate reality, because on an ultimate level, everything is an outpouring of unconditional love. It's quite likely that the mind may revolt against that idea, because the mind may immediately think of all the things that it dislikes, all the things that it hates, all the things that anger it, and go, no, that can't possibly be unconditional love. But this is why, or one of the reasons why, the mind can never really get the seeing of non-duality. You know, the apprehension that everything, no exclusions, is an outpouring of unconditional love. I sometimes tell an anecdote that happened to me at a meeting I was giving in Germany to try to make the point as, you know, how the mind and what the mind thinks is kind of irrelevant here. I was giving a talk in Germany, and there was a young woman in the audience who said nothing at all during the talk, but at the end of it, she immediately got up and came over to me while I was still sitting in my chair, and she said, "I have a question for you." She said, "Tell me, you say that unconditional love embraces everything. Does that include dog shit?" And I looked at her and I said, "Well, yes, unconditional love is unconditional. It embraces and includes everything." And at that point, this rather stern looking, rather serious young lady, her face broke into a big smile. And she said, that is what I wanted you to say. And she gave me a warm hug. So she at least had got it, that what the mind has to say about this has no bearing whatsoever. All that can be said is that unconditional love simply is the case. And whatever the mind argues about that, says about it, objects to about that, really all that can be added is, well, this is directly seen or it isn't directly seen. Until it's directly seen, it really has no real meaning and it's irrelevant. When it's directly seen, it's simply incontrovertible. And the suggestion from here is it is this seeing, the seeing that everything is full as well as empty, and that the fullness is the fullness of love. It's that seeing that really brings the seeking and the possibility of further seeking to an end, because when that's seen, what else can there be to seek? And whatever stories the mind has been holding on to, if it's been holding on to stories about meaning and purpose and the need to find meaning and purpose, that is all quite pretty likely to end at that point. And then after that, what is there? Well, after that, what there is simply whatever is happening, simply what's arising. It might be good, it might be bad, it might be pleasurable, it might not be pleasurable, but it's simply apprehended as what is. So, to sum up briefly, we could say that quite often, but not always, the seeing of what we're trying to talk about here, hopelessly attempting to talk about here, the seeing of what we're trying to talk about here sometimes happens in this way, that first there is a seeing or an apprehension or a realization that everything is empty. And that does not tend to bring an end to seeking, because there is a knowing that that is still incomplete. And secondly, there may arise the seeing that, oh, yes, this is empty, but it's also full. And it's the seeing of that that tends finally to lay seeking to rest, or it'd be more accurate to say the illusion of the seeking individual to rest. Because whatever happens after that, it's just known, recognized, apprehended that there is no possibility of there being anything more that can be seen. So we could sum up what we've been talking about so far as non-duality is the seeing that I am nothing, that there is no one, and that the seeing of non-duality is the seeing that I am also everything, and that there is unconditional love. This is an arising of unconditional love, no matter how much to the person or the individual or the personality, we could say, it may seem that this cannot possibly be the case. And so whatever means, through whatever means we have been seeking up to that point, some of us may seek through religious stories, some of us may seek philosophically, some of us may seek through spiritual paths, through meditation, some of us may seek through practices like mindfulness or self-inquiry. At the point that I'm talking about, when this is, if you like, fully seen, then all of that becomes irrelevant. It doesn't mean that some of that may not continue as either a story in the mind or as something that the character or the personality or the divine puppet who still remains alive may enjoy. So there may still be an interest in philosophical speculation. There still may be a feeling of connection to a religious path that has been followed for many years. There may still be an enjoyment of a practice such as meditation. I myself, for example, still meditate. But there's a knowing by no one that none of that is about going anywhere. None of that is leading anywhere. There is no goal to which any of that is bringing a person who it turns out is non-existent. I think that's enough for now, and we'll leave it there, and we will come back to another episode later on.